Hello and welcome along. So we're going to go back to talking about the primarchs, and this time I thought we'd talk about the traitor primarchs and how they could potentially be stopped from falling, stopped from turning to chaos or becoming traitors in general. So obviously there's a lot to get through. There's 9 of them, so we're going to go 3 at a time. So this video is going to cover 3 of them, and then I'm going to do 2 further videos which will cover the other 2, so look out for those in the future. So in this video we're going to talk about Horus, Angron and Fulgrim. So we'll start with Horus. So he's the big cheese of the heresy. So could Horus have been prevented from falling? I know some people would say, well, it's all part of the plan of the ruinous powers. It's the plan of the emperor. They kind of like this constant game they're playing with each other. Well, it's a serious game, but they're constantly trying to outwit each other, and that both sides have kind of accepted that this is going to happen, and they're just trying to maneuver pieces into the position so that it happens in a way that at least leads to some level of success for their side, and some, even though that accepts it's more of a stalemate position. But so you could argue that that's inevitable. No matter what you do, that's going to happen, and the emperor's kind of resigned to that, and that's why he does all the things he does that don't really make any sense, because he's just accepted that that's the way it is. Now you could argue that, and if you do, then okay, everyone who fell probably is destined to fall to chaos. Perhaps that's just the way it is. I'm going to argue that that's not the case, and that the emperor could have made decisions that would have prevented them from falling at least in some cases. So with Horus, I think that his biggest problem was his feeling of both inadequacy, and that he felt that he was going to let people down, that he wasn't up to the job of being War Master, and a feeling, a resentment that slowly built up over time, of feeling that he wasn't properly respected or rewarded for what he'd done, who he was, and celebrated in that enough by the general population of the empire, and generally, particularly amongst like the civilian rulers of the empire, who he felt were becoming more and more influential, and so on. So now Chaos Work basically uses this weakness within him and eventually draws him over to chaos, along with obviously his imminent death, which leads him to be in a very difficult situation of thinking, well, I'm going to die anyway. What do I do? If I reject chaos, I'm going to die. And they show him a vision of the future where he's not remembered, and which is a true vision of the future, of course, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if he becomes a traitor, obviously he will be sort of scrubbed from imperial records, and there'll be no big statue celebrating his success. And him seeing that future is what makes him get the final kind of decision to turn, because you think, well, if I'm not going to be respected for all I'm doing for the empire, why should I carry on? That's how chaos works. It tricked him with the truth, essentially. That's a pivotal moment. But if you come back from there, the reason he's get to that point is because of this inner problem that he has, though he feels inadequate and he feels like he's going to let people down. Essentially, that comes from just being made War Master. If he wasn't made War Master, he wouldn't have got to that point. Now, I've made the point previously in another video about Horus. Basically, if you didn't make him War Master, what would he have done? Because he would have felt at that point, when the emperor made someone else War Master, he would have felt rejected and let down, and probably he would have felt, okay, the emperor's abandoned me and lost trust in me because I'm the obvious candidate, because I'm the one that's senior. I'm the one that's been doing. I've been stepping into the role of leader when you're not around. Why haven't you carried that on and given me that job? So in some ways, it was a no-win situation for the emperor there. But I think a way around this would have been if the emperor, instead of creating a War Master, had created more than one War Master, and where the power could have been split, let's say 4 or 5 ways, where you could have got the more senior primarchs to take on more leadership role, given them more responsibility over a segment of the empire. So you could the empire is divided into segmentums. You could have just said, okay, Guilliman, you've got the ultimate segmentum. Horus, you've got this segmentum, etc., and just given them 3 to 5 of the primarchs that had generally the highest profile, the best leadership skills, and the more respect from the other primarchs, who could have taken on that role, similar to what Horus does. But instead of giving it all to him, giving it to like 4 or 5 of these most respected top primarchs. So people like Guilliman, Sanguinius, perhaps a couple of the others. So maybe the other ones are harder to pick. They're the obvious three, obviously with Horus. But you could, for example, someone like Vulcan was very respected by the other primarchs for most of them, and took on a leadership role, and was a very steady hand and could have done that. Dawn potentially. I think Fulgrim also would have been a good candidate. Actually, the point is, it would have taken some of that responsibility off of Horus, given it to some other people who could have equally handled it, and perhaps in some cases handled it better, and yet, but not feel like a slight to Horus, because he's still got one of the top roles. And he's up there with, say, three of his brothers as the top tier primarchs, and they wouldn't be too many of them. So the point where you could say, well, you could just give them all a bit of the galaxy to rule, and then, but that wouldn't really work, because one, some of them just not really good at ruling. I mean, you can't, Angron, Kurz, etc. But also because if there's too many, it's too broken up, it becomes inefficient and it doesn't really work, and you don't get an advantage to it. But I think a relatively small number, but kind of split in power between, say, 3 to 5 of them, would have worked pretty well. And you could have then grouped them accordingly. You could have given, the primarchs that worked better together and were had better relationships could have been grouped together. So they could have avoided any potential resentment of primarchs being led by ones they don't particularly like or respect. So that's my solution for how Horus doesn't fall. That way, he goes off, does what he does. He's a great leader. He's a great, he's a visionary leader. He's a just good all-round military and civilian leader. He could have done a great job of ruling essentially in the Emperor's stead in part of the empire, but he would never have had the power concentrated in one place enough to actually launch the heresy. And so he wouldn't have been a target for chaos in that sense, because they couldn't have made him. He wouldn't have been the leader of the heresy, because he wouldn't have had. He had at most a quarter of the power of the legions, and the other three would have been in a very good position to quickly counter him. So there you go. That's Horus. I think that plan would work. Why didn't the Emperor do it? Don't know. Angron. Well, Angron is a bit of different circumstances to pretty much all of the other primarchs, in that what makes Angron Angron? Partly it's his personality. We don't entirely know how much, but obviously it's the Butcher's Nails. So the Butcher's Nails are so influential on who he is. It's very hard to see Angron without them. I did a video before about the World Eaters before Angron and how much, and then I speculated in that how much when he was joined up with them, how that actually changed them, and also how much of him is what we see of him is actually the cause of the Butcher's Nails. And it is hard to say, but what we can say is the Butcher's Nails do have a very large impact on who he is. And as long as he had them before the Emperor finds him, which is probably impossible for the Emperor to get to him before he gets them, because he gets them essentially really quickly in his life, I think. And we know that the Emperor does think about taking them out, but he can't. Whether he explores that enough is maybe not another question, but he does try, and he decides that it's not possible. So if the Butcher's Nails can't be removed, then there probably is no hope for Angron. So in the short term, yes, if the Emperor had behaved differently when he found Angron, let Angron make not a last stand, but maybe helped Angron win his final battle, so that his comrades, the gladiators that he was fighting with, could have been saved, or at least some of them, and gone. At least the ones that did die died honourably, and he got a chance to defeat his enemy. That would have been certainly a better entrance into the Imperium and into being a part of it for Angron. So it would have smoothed over that initial sort of introduction of being a Primarch, what that meant to be, and so on. But ultimately, with the Butcher's Nails, they were eventually going to drive him insane, and eventually kill him, of course, because that's what they were killing him anyway, slowly. So probably long term, there's no real hope for Angron, and maybe the Emperor would have been better off just accepting that and letting them die on the planet with his comrades. Hard to say. But either way, it's very hard to see how Angron could be saved in the truest sense. A fully functioning Primarch, as he was intended, without taking out the Butcher's Nails. So perhaps, I'm going to have to say no on Angron. Now, Fulgrim. So I did mention Fulgrim before as one potential candidate for leading part of the Imperium as a sort of a War Master of a divided War Master task, because I think Fulgrim is a very capable all-round Primarch. He's got all the skills in all the areas. He's very, very capable, very intelligent, a great individual fighter, a great leader, a great general, and he's actually he's a craftsman. He just excels at everything. In some senses, similar to Sanguinius. Actually, he could have be one of the candidates for that role. Why does Fulgrim fall to chaos? So he falls because he gets possessed by a demon. Yeah, so now eventually he overpowers that demon because he's a Primarch and they're basically demons as well. So he kind of fights internally inside of his body to get control back, studies the demon, understands what it is, and that lures him basically down the path into chaos. He gets possessed on the planet Leron, which is where the Lair live, by the Lair blade, which is a demon blade. And if he doesn't ever pick up that blade, he doesn't get possessed, he doesn't fall to chaos. Basically, if his legion knew what they were going into when they attacked Lair, they wouldn't ever have been seduced into the worship of Slaanesh. They don't actively decide we want to do this. They get exposed to various artifacts, sort of pheromones, chemicals in the air that basically corrupt them without their knowledge and make them get addicted. So basically, it's a bit like someone being made a drug addict involuntarily by someone spiking their food or giving them injections in their sleep or something. They don't know this is happening, but then once it's happened, it's practically impossible to pull back from chaos once you've been infected, essentially, in that sense. And although as a Primarch he does have the power to kind of push back against that, and that's why he's able to defeat the demon ultimately that's trying to possess him. It was too much. It changed him too much, that process. But if he'd known about the potential of chaos, he wouldn't have picked up the blade. He was 100% loyal before then, and he was a very intelligent and knowledgeable Primarch that could have very easily been told, look, this is the situation. As you go out into the galaxy and you start conquering these various planets, you will find some unusual stuff, and some of it is so dangerous that you can't touch it. You've got to basically, if you come across a planet that has these symptoms, these kind of situations, then you just need to obliterate it from orbit, and don't touch any of the artifacts you find. If it was explained to him by the Emperor, he wouldn't have been as vulnerable to this as he turned out to be. So I think very avoidable corruption of Fulgrim, and a huge waste to the Imperium, because he was one of the best Primarchs in that sense in terms of his capabilities. So that is all three of them for this video. So I'm going to say Horus and Fulgrim could have been saved with the right management from the Emperor. Angron, unfortunately, is probably a lost case due to the Butcher's Nails. But there you go. What do you think? Could they have been saved? Am I maybe being too optimistic? Do you think that Angron could have been saved in some way? Did the Emperor really try hard enough to get the Butcher's Nails out? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.